erudition, information and entertainment. My name's Rob Briggs. I'm the co-founder and director of Greystone Gallery, and I'm very pleased that we've got with us today Victoria Wylie. I'll explain a little bit more about Victoria and her background in a second, but first of all, whilst we are here live and in person, we're also streaming live on Instagram. Do not worry, the camera is pointing this way, you will not be seen. So we've got Leslie, my co-founder and director, at the back there, and we've also got Anna, who's our assistant, who's working the camera there. This is part of our series of artist talks. It's the first one of 2026, so you're very welcome. And it's part of our current exhibition, New Visions, which showcases 4 artists, of which one of them is Victoria, and we're very pleased to have her here. So Victoria makes contemporary landscape paintings from her home studio in Angus. She explores the wilderness of Scotland's land and seascapes, creating atmospheric paintings that celebrate nature's vastness, the ever-changing drama of shifting elements and the dynamic interplay of light, where sky, sea and land meet. Victoria graduated from Duncan Jordanston College of Art and Design with a bachelor's in design and in constructed textiles. And she specialised in, I want to say Goblin, but that's probably the wrong thing. Goblin. In Goblin tapestry weaving, and went on to complete a master's in fine art. She's particularly fascinated by horizon lines, and this is a fascination that's rooted in her upbringing near North Yorkshire. The vast stretches of openness there still inform her work, with her paintings evoking a deep sense of openness and calm, yet through expressive brushstrokes, rich textures and bold colour contrasts, Victoria captures the fleeting intensity of stormy skies and golden bursts of sunlight. Her connection with and respect for the natural world is central to every mark that she makes, a connection that she hopes to share with others through her work. And this new collection, which you can see around you in the gallery or visit the New Visions exhibition online, is inspired by quiet winter walks from dawn through to dusk, which reflects the seasonal shift that we see. All the while, it's a reminder that darkness is a necessary space that allows light to emerge, reflecting optimism and evoking a sense of calm, renewal and possibility. So all of that fits very neatly with the concept of New Visions. So Victoria has exhibited widely throughout Scotland and the rest of the UK, and has artwork in corporate and private collections across the world. Mm-hmm. So please join me in welcoming Victoria Wylie.
Thank you.
So Victoria, can you tell us a little bit more, build on what I've said there, a little bit more about yourself and your work?
Okay. Do you want me to start from the beginning, from
as good a place as any?
Childhood or post-college? Which would you prefer? Or specifically with this exhibition, do you think?
I think from childhood.
Childhood,
so
okay.
Let's get a little bit more of an impression of who you are as a person and how your upbringing influenced where you've got to today in your journey, your artistic journey.
So my childhood, I wouldn't have said that was particularly creative. I was thinking when we were talking about doing the talk today, I didn't really grow up in a creative environment as such, but one of my earliest memories at primary school was making work for an agricultural competition. It was an art competition, and that was my first memory that I can recall. I was probably about 8 years old, and after that, as a teenager, I grew up in the sort of 80s, 90s. And music was very much part of who I was, and it defined you. Back then, it was a very tribal thing, was music. It defined who you were as a person. And I kind of found refuge in the art department. I found my tribe in the art department when I was a sort of teenager. And that was very much sort of shaped who I was. I suppose, with, for want of a better word, outsiders. We weren't sort of, we weren't necessarily the mainstream people. And I think that's part of what formed me to want to become an artist as well. The rebellion in me, the rebellious sort of nature in me as a teenager. I didn't want to have a normal career, a normal job. And the only thing that I could think of that I liked and enjoyed was being an artist. And I found refuge in the art department. That's where I spent most of my time. And
So can I just ask you to elaborate a little bit there about the music that you listened to when you were a teenager? Because certainly at the times that you're mentioning, I'm well aware there was a big connection between art and music and a lot of bands forming through art colleges.
yeah, definitely. I mean, the music that I listen to now in the studio is probably a little bit different to what I was listening to as a teenager, kind of. I was very much into, so that's where I was very much into sort of local pub bands, and then seeing live music. I was very much into kind of the Smiths, the Cure, Levellers, sort of pop, punk, folk music, the Pogues, the Popes, that kind of thing. So I spent most of my time going to festivals and, live music in pubs. And as I say, that's where I found sort of friendships with people who had a similar sensibility to me. It was mainly, I think I found my refuge in the art department because I found school a wee bit tricky sometimes, not through learning, but just through friendships. And it was only when I found my sort of tribe in the art department, and it was all boys actually, that I'm actually still in touch with from school. And we used to spend our weekends travelling to York or Leeds to see bands. We were all into similar sort of artwork, sort of surrealism and Jackson Pollock and all that sort of stuff that teenagers back in the very early 90s thought was super cool. And I think with the Stone Roses and their album covers and the kind of the artwork of album covers, it sort of defined our identity.
Let's touch on that a little bit because that's a really good connection there. So is anybody here familiar with Stone Roses album covers from the 90s? Yes, good. Yeah. So what you'll recognise there is very much almost drip style abstract paintings, very much in the style of Jackson Pollock. So that would be a good connection there.
Yeah. So I think that was probably where the sort of the foundation of it started, and really from that. I was a teenager, I was bloody minded as well. When it came to choosing a career, not through anything bad about my family or parents or anything like that, but it came from quite a conservative background. Nobody had had an art existence. My brother was the first person in our family to go to university, and I was told that I would be allowed to because they wanted the same thing for me and my brother. The background to that is my mum had to leave school at the age of 14 because education wasn't afforded to her as a female. So that was the kind of background that I was coming from, and I didn't want to conform. I didn't want to be the same as that, and I think my parents were completely petrified of the route I was wanting to take because I think they didn't understand it, they didn't recognise it, and they were worried about, I suppose, financial security. And that was something that was always drummed into me is, you need financial independence. And so it took a lot of convincing my parents and my teachers who wanted me to go to study something like English or geography, which I was excelling at school, geography particularly. And I think, again, that links in quite nicely with where I'm at now. So it was bloody mindedness and being a little bit, probably looking back, probably quite obnoxious and a bit rebellious and not wanting to be vanilla.
No, I can completely appreciate where you're coming from. I had a similar sort of background growing up where my grandmother was paying for school fees for myself, and she didn't want to pay for school fees for my sister because she didn't think, being sort of born about 1904, she didn't want girls to have an education. She didn't think it was important that girls had an education.
Yes.
And then for myself, I wanted to take a gap year before I went to university. I always wanted to go to university, but my father, who got taken out of school when he was 16 because my grandfather thought that you didn't need to work beyond that point, or you didn't need to study beyond that point, waste of time, put him into the family business. My father was petrified that I wouldn't go on to university, and I was the first in my family to do that. So I do have some sympathy for the position that you came up through.
Yeah, and I think as a part of half of my family is sort of very much military, and the other half sort of mining or engineering. So this thought of a teenage girl who was a vegetarian and wearing CND badges and wanted to disrupt hunts in rural North Yorkshire and wanted to go to art college. I can see now, as a mother myself of 3 teenage girls, how probably terrifying that must have been for them, because it was not a world, as I say, that they occupied or understood. But I compromised with everybody. When it went to taking A-levels, I agreed to take on an extra A-level. I went to night school to do an extra AS level, just in case I changed my mind, because art wouldn't be considered a proper subject when applying to university.
Yes, I know the kind of thing.
It was the whole thing seems to have been a push from the very beginning, definitely.
I don't know about you, but my dad was terrified that I might turn out gay. Nothing wrong with that, and I wasn't. But I remember one dinner party. I sat at one end of the table and my dad's at the other, and he's glowering at me and he's pointing. Because at that time I had, if you can believe it, earrings and long black hair and a bit of eyeliner. And he said, look at that, that's my son. My son's gay. And I was like, how did you get to that then?
I think my mum was terrified that I was going to just run off and get a caravan and just travel. And she was really worried that that's the life that I was kind of going to, because it was just so opposite of where they had come from.
Well, you were listening to the Levelers.
I know. Yeah, so that was kind of, and all I wanted to do at this point was paint. I just wanted to paint. I didn't know at that time what other careers there were, perhaps within the creative industries. But as a teenager, I just wanted to paint. But how I was going to achieve that, I had absolutely no clue at that stage. And actually, even at school, I wasn't necessarily getting the support that I'd hoped for. Because when it came to applying to art college, once I'd convinced everybody that this was a great idea, when I went to my art teacher to ask for help and support, and he just looked at me and said, "It's your portfolio, you do it." And that was it. You know, I was 17, not having a clue, and it was just like, right, okay.
So take us through the next step. How did you go from potentially a setback here with your parents thinking, not sure if she could do that, through to your art teacher, and you've got rebellious Victoria the teenager.
Yeah, I told you I'm bloody minded. I put in a complaint against my art teacher, to the head teacher, the head of sixth form, who totally backed me. And from then on, I had to go and work with the other art teacher, who was an absolute delight. And I kept in touch with him, actually, and he supported me for the rest of my time, and he was wonderful. And actually, when I was doing my degree, I went back to work with him in the department, because I had a research trip to Wellington School of Design in New Zealand, and as part of funding that, I'd written to various businesses in my school, asking them if they could fund my trip, and my school did. They gave me some money, so as part of that, I went back and worked with the department for a couple of weeks with A-level students, and bringing in a new perspective of not just painting. I was doing a textile degree at the time, and introduced all these wide-eyed A-level students to collage and mixed media and making with things other than paint, and it was lovely actually to be able to repay that back.
So just help me fill in a little gap there between the going back and the trip to New Zealand and everything. Where we were was you were thinking about going on to college. How did you, and you were getting support from this different teacher. How did you end up at Duncan Jordanston? What was the program there? And then you were very happily into painting, which then turns into textiles.
Yeah, so I did a year at York. So, and this was where my other teacher had supported me, because at this point when I was putting my UCAS applications together, I didn't realise you had to do a foundation year. I think it's a portfolio course in Scotland. I had no idea. No. So I did stepping stone at York College of Further and Higher Education, and that stripped everything back to the basics. And we were taught all the stuff that really we didn't get taught at school, and it confused the hell out of me, to be honest with you. I was just like, because you got a little taster in fine art, a taster in graphics, a taster in textiles, and I just found it a bit overwhelming, to be honest with you, all this stuff that perhaps I hadn't had the background in. But I had one great tutor. I like to make things a lot. I just like making things with my hands at this point. And it was actually this tutor had said, have you considered textiles? Which I hadn't, because I'd just been obsessed with painting. And she told me about Duncan Jordanston and constructed textiles. I was like, what is this? And I looked into it, and she said, but don't apply unless you're serious about doing it, because we've got a good relationship with them, and they don't have many spaces. So that's what sort of started it. And at this point, a lot of my contemporaries were all looking to go to Liverpool and Manchester and London. And the thought of going to a big city, just no. By this point, I was already, because Duncan and Jordanston, the seed had been planted there, I was looking to Scotland, basically. And part of my teenage years at this point, I'd already been doing things like Duke of Edinburgh, so I was doing expeditions, I was going down to Wales, hiking a lot. Randomly, I was involved in Air Cadets. That's just the total wild card there, but I was doing a lot of hiking and a lot of outdoor stuff with them. That's slightly kind of, another random bit in my life that I do say has contributed to it, but my desire wasn't to go to a big city. I wanted to go to somewhere that was closer to the hills, similar to where I'd grown up.
So tell me about the difference between textiles and constructed textiles.
Okay.
Particularly because Leslie, who the audience can't see at the moment because she's right behind them, she also did a textiles degree.
Oh, did you? I didn't know that, Leslie.
Yeah.
So it was constructed textiles I did. It was split into three, as it was then, three areas: knit, weave, and tapestry weaving. Now, the difference between weave and tapestry weaving is for cloth for either fashion or interiors. And tapestry weaving was Gobelin tapestry weaving, so the wall hangings that you get, not cross-stitch. So this is a contentious thing. You know, the Bayeux tapestry and all these they're not tapestries. They are actually technically cross-stitch. And it's funny because I have this conversation a lot with textile colleagues, and tapestry weaving is not a loom, but it's the same idea in and out. And it's if you've ever been to Stirling Castle and seen the beautiful wall hangings in the Stirling Castle. And so it was that I specialised in. But it was also a focus on gallery textiles as well. So it was a lot of construction and making things out of random objects, and very much about discovering marks and textures. And because I was making a lot of things, I got into macrame and all sorts of very strange things, and messing around with different materials just to play with surfaces, and that's what I was fascinated with, and that's where I ended up. And my main tutor at Duncan Jordanston was Gordon Brennan, who was also the tutor at Edinburgh College of Art within the drawing and painting school, whereas in Dundee it was the School of Design. So although I've got a design degree, I was very much on the fine art, gallery art, textile side of things.
One thing that's interesting to me about textiles, particularly tapestry, how do you go from a bunch of yarns, right, or threads or whatever, and take those and make them into something that makes coherent sense visually?
Yeah.
You know, maybe I'm assuming you kind of would plan it out beforehand, visualize it. But then how do you take that and actually get the right threads and the right colours in the right place to get these images or these symbols or whatever it is that you're trying to create on the tapestry?
That's an interesting question, and I suppose I'm not leapfrogging too much here, but this is where this has all come in. I used to design my tapestries in the way that I paint now. It was a lot of mark making, and a lot of the tapestries I'm making they were perhaps a little bit more minimalist of what I'm doing now, but this is where my first fascination started, with lines and horizon lines. We used to, you could always spot the constructed textile students in Dundee when they were out on photography missions. We always used to be down at the docks in Dundee taking close-up photos of all the old things lying about, you know, with our macro lenses on our cameras, of decaying concrete and just decaying anything. And we used to make these quite abstract compositions, and then it was just about exploring these surfaces and choosing the yarns, whether it's linen or cottons and wools, and choosing, how to translate that. And it was it was the structure of how you wove and how you interpreted the surfaces. And that was part of the exploration of what we did, I suppose. And some people used to do quite fibre arty tapestry weavings. Mine tended not to be. I did weave with raw wool fleece sometimes to create different textures, but I was really obsessed with this tension of very plain, minimal spaces and then very detailed horizon lines. And it started by looking at micro landscapes, what I used to say, these cracks in concrete, and photographing gravestones and walls. And I used to create little landscapes out of that. And it was from that I progressed on to actually looking up rather than looking down. And in Dundee, it's a very open and wide city. You've got the River Tay running through it. And that really started making a big impact on my work. And we actually had a project, was it in final year with Verdant Works? Verdant Works had just opened, and if anybody's aware of it, the weaving industry within Dundee, Verdant Works was one of the weaving mills, and they opened up as a heritage museum when we were at college, and we were invited to do a project. And that's when I really started examining the landscape around me and putting that more into my work as well. So yeah, it was just I don't know if that answered your question about how I got from that to the weaving, but it's just learning the materials and the surfaces that they can create, and that's where I became very fascinated with textures and marks and lines and mark making, and lots of sketchbooks and lots of messing around with different materials. And our studios always used to stink of cellulose thinners as everyone was printing and then scraping and scratching and burning and fire alarms going off. And yeah, it was a nice experimental time.
Students
actually.
And burning stuff.
Oh, I know. It's just pyromaniacs.
When I was a student, I used to do some rowing, and the student boat club hadn't insured the actual boats and the shed where they were kept, and someone dropped a cigarette and the whole thing went up. At least £100,000 gone because they hadn't bothered to insure it, but that's students' fear.
Yes.
Anyway, but just coming back a little bit to the technique with the textile design and particularly tapestry, how does one actually build up a picture? I'm presuming that you're using a loom, for instance, to get everything together. How do you get the threads in the right order with the right colours in the right places in order to create these intricate patterns or images?
So most of the time I worked on a loom, just a wooden frame that I used to rest against the desktop. But you can also get this scaffolding frame, essentially, and you warp up. That's the big thing. You've got to warp up to get the tension absolutely right. You've got to make sure that you don't cross them over. You've got to work out how many warps per inch, which, depending on the thickness and the size, you know, if you're working on a big wall and you don't want it too fine, because you'll be there for about 100 years weaving this thing. If you're working on the miniature, which I started doing after my trip to New Zealand, you're working on much finer threads. And then you usually have the image of what you're wanting to create next to you or behind you, a black and white version perhaps behind. And then you ink on with Indian ink onto the wall, key marks.
Right.
So that you've kind of got a guide.
Right, okay.
Weaving by numbers.
Weaving by numbers, yes.
Yeah, a little bit like that.
Okay.
And but you always have to have a visual thing next to you, and then it's just a case of interpreting as you're going along and making sure that you're keeping the tension correct, and that so that's how it's done. But on a massive scale, because post art college, I actually spent time at the tapestry company, which is now Dovecot. Infirmary Street here, but it used to be based in Dauphin, in the original Dovecot studios. And that was fascinating because then I saw that on a big scale. And you have all your bobbins hanging with your mix. It's like mixing paint. You've got all these different, you've got reels and reels of all these different colours and shades. And with them, the tapestry that I was working on then, it was less experimental than perhaps I was doing myself or at college, where you can have different thicknesses of yarns. This was from memory, very much, it was all wool and everything was the same ply of wool, but you blend it. You have your bobbins with, X amount of of red and cream or whatever to get the blend that you need. And it's the master weavers who used to create that, and then us apprentices used to just sort of follow that, if that makes sense.
It does. I was going to ask you to take us on from the conclusion of your degree into the next stage of your development. So you went straight from university, did you, to working with the tapestry company?
No, I didn't. I had a couple of years in between.
Okay, here we go.
I had a couple of years in between because I left art college completely, and I think this is true to say of a lot of art students. You leave art college and you're just like that. Okay, now what? Especially, gosh, it was nearly 30 years ago, not quite 30 years ago. I think perhaps the connection between art college and the big bad world, the bridge, wasn't perhaps as defined back then. And as I say, similar to what I experienced in York, when everyone was going off to London, Liverpool, Manchester, when I was in Dundee, literally everyone from my class after graduation went down back to Glasgow, back to London. Nobody stayed in Dundee, because this was Dundee pre-DCA, pre-V&A. Yep. There wasn't a lot of, there was Generator Project, which is where I ended up. I got a studio with Generator. And this was actually an interesting couple of years. I'd had odd exhibitions. I'd exhibited down in the mall galleries with the Society of Designer Craftsmen, doing tapestry weaving, and I had little exhibitions here and there, but really kind of not knowing, because textiles and galleries, and it was this, you know, it's the craft, it's not a fine art. I started getting into workshops at this point. I was approached to run some workshops, and this is quite an interesting one. It's a little bit of I ended up signing on for a short while, and this ended up actually in some ways being a springboard for me, because it is when Donald Dewar had just introduced the New Deal, which was like an apprenticeship, and I had the most amazing advisor down at the job centre called Eddie. And Eddie understood that if you were in your studio making, or if you were applying for exhibitions, or if you were being an artist, he saw that as job seeking. And he was amazing, and he was so supportive of me, and he was brilliant. And so that helped. And then in the run-up to the DCA opening, Dundee Contemporary Arts, if anyone who doesn't know DCA, there was things starting to sort of, there was a buzz in Dundee, and it was fantastic. So it started to feel that there was possibility for creative people. And then what happened was, when I was on New Deal, I met someone. Are you aware of Patricia Fleming? She runs in Glasgow. She ran, I can't remember the name of it. Let me just check my notes. It was like an incubator for emerging artists, and she'd run one in Glasgow, and then she came over to Dundee and ran it there. And I just made a note of this earlier, and here we go. It was called Fuse, and Fuse provided free studio space for artists. And in Glasgow, she had people like Martin Boyce, Douglas Gordon, and Jim Lammy were part of her original cohort. So she came along to Dundee, and it was fantastic, because I went from this tiny little studio space and Generator that had a dehumidifier in it, because it was so damp and so horrible, which isn't great with textiles. And then I was the first person on this program. It was a 6 months free studio space, and I got an entire floor of a warehouse to myself, which was amazing. And I was just started painting. That's when I started painting, actually, sort of larger scale paintings. And then that was the beginning of a journey that I hadn't planned. Dundee Contemporary Arts opened, and within that was Dundee Public Art Programme. And I was asked to come along and run workshops for the opening of the DCA. I did that. And then through New Deal, I was 2 days a week working with Dundee Public Art Programme. I was brought in to sort of be the conduit between, before they had their education officer in post, I was bringing in all the artists and organising all the workshops at the DCA. Not a career I had planned at all, but it was like, you know, I think this is part of my thing, is I've always had an open mind, because there is no one route, one path, I find, as I found over the last 30 years. And I think keeping an open mind and being, what is it my husband says, it's a Darwinian approach to being a creative. You just have to adapt. And there was an opportunity that was offered and I took it.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of 15 years in industry, partly with Edinburgh Tapestry Company and then partly with us as a project manager within the creative industries. And that was me. I left my studio and started working in the Edinburgh Tapestry Company for a while. And then I was based for 15 years. So, yeah.
So you managed to parlay effectively a creative career into an administrative one.
Yeah.
While still I hope still keeping your hand in behind the scenes.
Yeah, so what happened is I was at the Edinburgh Tapestry Company for a while, and then in parallel to that I was with Dundee Public Art Programme, so I was doing an arts admin job and then a studio-based job. I was offered both jobs full-time, so I had a decision. Gosh, and it was a head and heart decision, and I was kind of thinking, well, what could potentially be better for me in the future? So, rightly or wrongly, I chose the admin job, the Dundee Public Art Programme. I was doing a lot of community work, workshops, organising artists for the DCA programme, and literally weeks later, that's when the Edinburgh Tapestry Company folded, or didn't fold as such. It was owned. It was the Marquis of Bute.
Yeah.
It was one of his assets, and he sold it off, or he closed it down, and it spent. I don't know how long it was in. How long it had closed before the current people who have it and moved it to Infirmary Street. So I kind of felt like I dodged a bullet with that one a bit, But then a few months later, I lost my job. It was a couple of years actually. That eventually folded as well. But then I ended up through that and connections, and I ended up having brilliant jobs within publishing, working with dancers, working with designers and architects. Ended up in academic research, just from choosing the arts admin side of things. So, but all the while, yes, I was making, but never for exhibitions. I'd kind of left the studio side of things behind. I was making odd commissions and I was making things for presents. But I actually thought that was going to be my career then for life.
So what changed?
Well, there was a few things. Contracts don't go on forever within the creative industries. You're lucky if you get a 2-year contract. So I was I worked for a little publishing company here in Edinburgh for a while, Pocketbooks with Alec Finlay, which was amazing. That project came to an end. I went and did my Masters of Fine Arts because I thought I've spent a long time managing other people's projects. I want to get back into my own. Went and did my Masters, thinking that would be a launch pad back into my own career, but then that didn't quite work out. Personal life meant that I had to get a job. So I'd been working at the university while doing my Masters. I'd been working on Frank Gehry's Maggie's Centre. Okay. We had a whole load of events surrounding the opening of Maggie's Centre in 2003, I think it was. So again, I was working on that and then sidestepped into a role at the university there and then ended up in academic research for 5 years. And when that came to an end, I just started doing it on a freelance basis, and by this point I'd started having family.
Right.
So family was a real crux because I was travelling a lot with my job. And
so did you meet your partner whilst you were doing your studies, or was this?
Yeah, actually, it was when I did my Masters, actually. So when I did my Masters, I wasn't painting. I was doing installation work and video and photography, and I was looking for a sound artist, musician, to create a soundtrack to a video piece that I'd made. And we got introduced, and Gavin made me this soundscape. And the rest is history. And it's lovely actually because I'd been through quite I'm not going to go into details on camera here, but I'd been through not a great period in my life where, from being this rebellious teenager and fighting against, you know, the resistance to being an artist, I then found myself in a situation, a relationship that was similar, that had basically knocked out any confidence in myself of being an artist. And I think me going and doing my masters was me trying to get a bit of that back. And at the end of that masters, I had to walk away from a big part of my life to escape, essentially, to remind myself where I needed to be. So again, that was my launch pad back into making again, but then life's demands meant I ended up getting a job again. So it's this forever pull back into something that I hadn't planned. But again, that was an amazing experience of all these little jobs that I had, these project management jobs, introduced me to more people doing amazing things, working in academia, working with people who were at the top of their field in whether it was fine art, whether it was design, whatever it was. It was incredible, actually, and I got to do amazing event organising, and I learned how to be a graphic designer. I started designing and publishing books, and you know, and that has all contributed to me finally going back into the studio in 2015, 2016 and launching my business as an artist. And I went absolutely full into it with all the skills that I'd learned over the last 15 years with this new life, having met my husband and him giving me the confidence and, this sounds crazy, the permission to do what I'd wanted to do. You know, the first year that we were together, we went off to Bilbao, to the Guggenheim, to go and see the Mark Rothko exhibition, you know, and that in some ways represents so much about my new life and where I was going, and and
I just want to check in with the audience on something there, because you spoke about Rothko, and I want to pick up on that. Are all of you familiar with Mark Rothko and his work? Yeah, I thought so. And one of the things that strikes me about Rothko, and particularly what you're saying there, Victoria, is that Rothko moved from being a more traditional painter, particularly of city scenes and people, into these incredible, almost monumental blocks. So, you know, that's in some ways it feels to me like part of that journey mirrors your journey in terms of moving from something that was perhaps more controlled into something that's much more freeing.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Rothko, I have to, you know, he is the artist that I would name as my biggest inspiration. Yeah. Absolutely. He's, you know, he is incredible. And I was first exposed to him when I was at college in York. We came down to London to see at the Royal Academy. There was an exhibition of American art in the 20th century, and that was when I was first introduced to his work in person. And I've just been in awe of his work ever since, and to sit in that space. And it's a very, I'm not a religious person at all. I'm a spiritual person, I would say. But to sit in space, it's very overwhelming, actually. Very peaceful, and it's very everything, all the emotions, all at the same time, and it's just incredible. And that was,
So you'd say that trying to, from your own perspective, are you trying to replicate those feelings within yourself and then expressing them through your art?
I suppose so. I mean, I suppose, but to have, I mean, God, I don't know if I could ever replicate the impact that Rothko's work has on anybody. But for me, creating and stirring those feelings in your artwork is incredibly important. And yes, I suppose I am trying to do that. And one of the things that I love about when people who appreciate and like my work, because I, you know, at events like today, or when I'm at openings, or when I'm doing direct selling events, one of the lovely things that or I'm at Pitt and Weem, or wherever, the joy of meeting people who get your work and respond to it, it is absolutely, they get it. It's beautiful when the connection is there. They see the work and they're like, it makes them stop, or they feel immediate joy or calm, or, you know, they've got it. And that's what that's what I'm trying to portray. And yes, that is exactly how it, you know, if it makes you just catch your breath, that's what I had with Rothko, without a doubt. Yeah, and I think it's artists a bit like Rothko, with that almost monumental, enormous experiences. And another artist that I'm similar feeling is James Turrell and his skyscapes. It's a similar kind of feeling where it's, you know, it's not just an object, or it's not just a thing, it's a whole feeling. And I think that's what I get from being out in the outdoors as well, you know, the sea, the ocean, the mountains, the big outdoors, the wilderness is my cathedral, my church. That's where, yeah, and I think trying to capture that in a painting, and yeah.
I'd like to come back to both spirituality and artistic inspirations in a few minutes. I think this is a really good segue to take us through some of the images that you've brought with you today.
Okay, so as you can imagine, I've got thousands of photos on my camera reel, and I've tried to be really selective. I was only going to send 3 or 4 over. I managed to get it down to about 40. So these photos, I suppose, are in connection with the work that I made for here. Although these weren't taken for this exhibition, I suppose it's sort of a good summary of what gets me going. I'm a bit of a cloud appreciation kind of person. I love the enormity of the world around us and the elements, and, you know, the fact that we're little specks in a much bigger place. And I think it's healthy for humans to be reminded of our place. And I think, you know, I think this is why I've never put references to people, human presence in my paintings. You know, we are so, the earth, the ocean, the sky is so much bigger than we will ever be. And I think it's important that we remember that, and it's important that we're reminded of that, and it's important that we get out into that and to sit it and smell it and experience it. And this first photo that's been sitting here, this was a bit of a Dorothy, Wizard of Oz moment, actually. Just up the road from where I stay, having a barbecue at friends, and this enormous cloud just appeared over Turin Hill. And it was, you know, it was unbelievable. You could almost feel the electricity in it, and it's, you know, I think it was almost midsummer, and you know, it's like everything stopped for 10 minutes. Everyone else ran inside, and I was just standing there. It's like, oh my God, this is something else. And then it just disappeared, and then perhaps a wee bit you bleep here, but then the whole landscape just came alive, and this sort of almost, you know, the Jesus rays coming through the sky. It was just overwhelming experience, and it's that experience that comes back time and time and time again in so many of my paintings. Even if I'm painting somewhere else, that is one of those experiences that's always there. And there's another one that's similar that I'll come to later. But I'll just quickly go through these. These are just to give you an overview, I suppose, of the places that I go and what excites me. We touched upon it earlier about how going back into the studio when I had family, it kind of shifted everything. And as such, my research trips, my artist residences, or also known as family holidays, we used to basically just put the tent in the back of the car, and I used to drag the girls from being little babies, and we used to camp wherever I wanted to paint next. So these are basically my family photos. So sitting a lot, looking, horizon lines, open space, colour contrast, the elements, clouds, hill walking. I haven't been up to many Munros since I've had kids, but I used to do a lot of hill walking. And again, cloud appreciation. These are just the Munros near where I stay, just up the road. And being outside and experiencing it is hugely important to me, and not just sitting and watching, but walking and travelling through it. I'm a big cycler. These were taken around a time when I was running a lot more. I did a couple of extreme duathlons that involved cycling and then running up hills. And, well, I was more of a walker up the hill than a runner. But I did these things, and I do paddleboarding and kayaking. And so travelling and being in the environment is hugely part of the experience. The photos that I take are part of my research and part of the process within the studio, but I don't have them as prompts in the studio. I'm very lucky to I stay in Angus, which there's a lot of historical ancient stuff in Angus, Pictish related, and Iron Age hill forts. And this is up on Turin Hill on the solstice, when should have been the opening of my first ever solo show, but it was 2020, so everything obviously was cancelled. So I went up a hill and drank a bottle of wine instead and came back down again. So that was nice. The last sort of daylight on Turin Hill. And it doesn't even have to be anywhere spectacular. I just go walking. We did a lot of walking in lockdown. I walk for mental health. Not makes me sound like I'm very fortunate. I've never had poor mental health, but I've done a lot of walking workshops with people for well-being and mental health. I work a lot with young people, and I've done with adults as well. Walking is a huge part of my practice, and being embedded in nature and the great outdoors, and learning to appreciate what we have around us, and being grounded and noticing little things and seeing pops of colour and textures and patterns, and seeing the little things that give us joy that you don't need to buy or go far to see. What I was saying about going down to the docks when I was a student and looking for these little things like that, it's finding the joy in the colour and the amazing things in the ordinary. Going back to that first photo, this is another one of these experiences. This was on Colonsea. This was 2020 when things were crazy, and in October when things were less crazy, we went to Colonsea to stay away from the bad behaviour that was happening on the west coast with a lot of people. We wanted to stay away from crowds when people were going and doing wild camping that wasn't wild camping. And we went to Colonsea, and it was quiet and lovely and wonderful. My girls were also at primary school. They were tiny. We used to drag them on crazy bike rides, and we'd just done a 7-mile bike ride across rocky roads and got to this most amazing bay called Balnahard Bay, and then this massive cloud just deposited its very heavy rain on us, and the girls are just standing there soaked, but it's like, part of the experience. It's wonderful. It's, character building. But that whole, that they'd achieved this, that they got it. We stayed there for the day, even though we were soaking wet. But it was a magical, lovely, freeing time after we'd all been locked up for months, hadn't we? So it was just that, oh God, what's that horrible, really cheesy expression? It's not waiting for the rain to pass, learning to dance in the rain. It's really terribly cheesy, but it's that whole thing about, when I'm quite an optimistic person, and I think even when life throws challenges at you, because I've got a design background as well, I see problems there to be solved, not to be as barriers. And I think that, again, that experience, that is very much of that year, And I think, my work, I try to bring out that, I think with the colours that I use and the movement and the marks, it is about joy, it's about power, it's about being bold and, full of expression. And Colonsea was amazing because it was just such a dramatic place in autumn, and these very elemental moments of heavy clouds and pops, lights, and you know, blazing sunshine one minute and then you're being battered by hail the next, and more cloud appreciation. And the Atlantic Ocean there is fierce as anything. The waves, I love the ocean, I love the sea, but it actually terrifies me as well. You've got to have so much respect for it. I love being out in it, but it actually fills me with fear as well. And I think you just got to, like with everything, you have to just respect what we have. And that is really important to my work, and when I'm running workshops and taking young people out into the big wide world and going on walks with them, getting them to perhaps, I think it's a lost thing, I think, at the moment with young people. And I think a big part of my practice working with young people and experiencing this outdoors with them is a really, I've learned a lot from them and their experiences and what I wanted to portray in my paintings as well, and helping them realise their value as well within a natural environment, within nature. It makes you stop and think and listen and grounds you. It takes away the noise.
There's something there that, particularly taking away the noise, I'd like to dig into a little bit deeper, and then relate to the pieces that we have in your current show, if you don't mind. So from what you've been telling us, it seems to me that there are elements of 4 major influences that impact on how you express yourself and how your artistic creations come together. One of them is spiritual, whether you want to call that a particular religion or an experience. One of them is artistic, so influences from people that you've looked at, and you mentioned Rothko, and I'm sure there's no doubt a few others as well. One of them is musical, and one of them is natural in terms of being in nature. So there's all this sort of melting pot of some very, very striking and strong influences that then feed into the experiences that you have and that you then express. So I'd like you to take that concept, if you wouldn't mind, of all these influences that you're absorbing and then expressing out again, and tell us a little bit more about how this current collection came together and how it was influenced by those different types of area.
Yeah, so I think within the context of the New Visions idea as well, and this sort of space between winter and spring, I took it because January and that sort of almost a no man's land, I've learnt to love January because it's a beautiful pause in, for me, the months leading up to Christmas are complete chaos. You know, from September, because I take part in a lot of in-person events, markets and fairs and pop-ups and open studios and what. It's crazy busy, and you're making work for galleries as well as doing in-person events, and it's just relentless. And the last few years I've come into Christmas utterly exhausted, and you come into January and you're just like that, and it's beautiful. And people say, oh God, January goes on for about 50 weeks, and I love the way it just suddenly stops. And the weather that we've been having, I love, because you don't feel obliged to do or rush or go or be. You can just, it's a bit about currying in. It's, you've got your fireside, you've got books, you've got moments to just kind of pause. And I think that's what I wanted with this. I wanted it to be that kind of and breathe. And then my experiences of being outside, it's very limited daylight. You've got very short moments where there is actually any daylight, even if it does actually properly get light. And I've been getting up at dawn, well, way before dawn, because the sun doesn't keep up until about midday, does it? But my youngest daughter's got a paper round, and because we've got a dog now, so I get up in the morning in turns with my husband, and I go out walking in the morning with her to keep her company. And there's a particular bit, we're going around this housing estate, and it looks east, and you can just see every morning just hints of the day starting to break, and each day it gets a fraction later and a fraction later, and then the birds start to make a noise, and you can it's literally each day there's a slight switch in there, and it's subtle and it's lovely. And then similar, I often take the dog for a walk once the girls will come home from school, and it's just as sun's setting. So it's just these glimmers of hints of light, and then it just gets a little bit longer, and it's just so hopeful. And then you start to see the first snowdrop popping up, and although it's a very still time and quite dark, there's just these glimmers of hope. And this particular collection of work, well, some of them are based on perhaps landscapes that I wasn't experiencing in over winter and in January, because what I was saying earlier about I refer back to experiences I've had before. I'll go and paint a flicker that's come into my mind from this morning paper round walk, but I'll be thinking of Shetland, where I went on a research trip 2 years ago, or, at Balnahard Bay, but bringing in the stillness, or that something that's just about to happen, the hint of change, the hint of promise. And I think as well, without going off on a complete tangent here, this collection particularly has been done to a backdrop of quite a dark place that the world is in at the moment, and everything feels quite heavy. And I think I consume too much news, and that is on my mind a lot, and my painting is my way of working through and navigating quite a strange world at the moment. And because I know how much joy and hope my work gives to people when they connect with it, I wanted to tie all these things in. That's why although there's a lot of darkness in these paintings, there is light, there's wee pops of colour, there is reminders that I think the enormity and the intensity of the elements and the world, like I said before, it's just a reminder, as humans we're so insignificant in the grand scheme of things, and we really need to remind ourselves about what's important and what matters and what we need to reconnect with, and to go outside and take a deep breath and put things in perspective. And one of the things that I love to do that came about from lockdown and entertaining little children was we used to go and watch the sunrise at Lunham Bay quite a lot. It's a very grounding, you're watching in silence the sun rising. And even doing that on a day that's like a day like today, there's no sun, but it's a very softness of the sun rising. In fact, that end piece there, that soft dawn rising, I think it's called, that was a sunrise moment on a day like today, where there's still subtle hints and transitions and lights, and I don't know, it's just these moments and these pauses in life, and it's almost like mindfulness and being in the moment, and perhaps forgetting the weight of the complete chaos that is going on around us. And I use that as a tool in the studio for working through the darkness. And there is hope, there is light, and I think, does that make sense?
Absolutely, well, it makes sense to me. So just, I'd like to bring the audience in at this point, and then we'll finish up, because I'm conscious time's moving on a little bit. So, audience, live studio audience, what questions have you got for Victoria? Richard.
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming. Very quickly, that first photograph you had of the sheep, it really, the sheep obviously believe in the concept that sheep may safely graze, because they're completely unconcerned Yes, wonderful. My question was really, you might have answered it when you were talking about your that you start for your overarching theme that you just spoke. But when you come to your blank canvas, have an idea of what the painting is going to look like before you start it. That's question one.
I'm glad you've asked that, actually. Do you want me to answer that one just now before you go into it? Because it sounds like you have another one lined up there. That's really interesting, because the process of making a tapestry couldn't be further removed from the way I paint now. And I think that's part of the reason I stopped weaving, because I found it so slow and so frustrating. The way I paint is quite energetic. It's quite a physical way of painting. There's a lot of movement and a lot of play in it. And I've got different... I sometimes start with a definite idea in my head about what I'm wanting to paint. More often than not, it goes off on a complete tangent. I think I was speaking earlier. I've learned to embrace, if that tangent happens, to go with it. I used to fight it, and I wanted it to be what I had in my head. But I've learned to trust the process. I work quite intuitively. So although I might have an idea to start with, the catalyst, it sometimes goes somewhere else. And that's why sometimes I have multiple paintings on the go at any one time, so that I can then switch between them, so I can try and stay true to that original idea. Sometimes when I start a painting, the way the process starts, again linking in with music, I always have music on. Sometimes it's the radio, sometimes it's Radio 6, because that takes me back to my teenage years. There's a lot of Cure and Levellers and all sorts of stuff on that. But when I'm really, and this is actually, it never fails. If I'm in a bit of a hole and I can't get out of it, I'm not quite sure where I'm going. There's an artist called John Hopkins that I listen to, and he's got a particular album called Singularity. And I put my earbuds in, and it completely closes off everything, and I just zone in, and it is incredible. And every single time, I just get so engrossed in it, and I just use that. And when I'm starting my paintings, I sometimes have a very playful session first to figure out where I'm going, because I don't have a definite idea. It's almost to get rid of the blank canvas. And I will get my pastels, my oil pastels and my pencils, and I'll just make a scribbly mess, and I'll just dance to whatever music I've got on. And it's very much about movement and creating maps, turning my canvas up, dripping and spraying, and it's really good fun. And it's actually workshop, and it's that process that I've done a lot of workshops with kids before as well, even down to little babies and toddlers, doing that kind of, because it's about breaking down the barriers and making marks on paper to make it fun and playful. That's really important. And if I've not got an idea of where I'm going, that's always how I start, having fun with it and letting myself loose. Other times I'll start with a very bright coloured canvas, or even metallic, and then I will start with, sometimes with sketches and photos that will start as a prompt, and then I know what I'm doing. So sometimes it is very structured. The photos and the sketches get put away quite quickly, because I've learned to my own detriment that if I stick to that quite closely, the translation's just all wrong. I have to work quite fluidly and quite intuitively. And because I'm sometimes using a lot of materials, they don't always necessarily do what I want them to do. So I try not to control them too much, and I then go with how they're dictating me. If that makes sense.
It does, and it largely answers.
Okay.
Not quite. Sometimes you get right. About that characters take over the story.
Yes.
And to an extent you said that
Completely, and it's embracing those moments of the unexpected, rather than. I used to get quite frustrated if something hadn't quite gone the way I wanted it to, but I now look at it as just, as I say, part of the process. And even if it ends up getting painted over, it's almost like layers of geology. Each adds to the next layer and the overall finish. Perhaps not so much with some of these paintings here, but some of my more textured work. There is so much layering and scraping and digging back to reveal what's beneath the surface. And that's, in fact, that one there, that's with the kind of the green, that's just to the left, that one there, yeah. There's a lot of the bottom left-hand corner is a lot of the early marks that I've left exposed, and those are marks that I've had perhaps less control over, but I love that organic feeling about them compared to the more controlled horizon and the sort of the slightly mountainous feels. And I love the combination of chaos and control, because well, the world is a bit chaotic, isn't it? So yeah, and it's playful, and I think again it's the nod to my textiles background. We're always encouraged to play with different textures and materials, and how I designed my tapestries.
There is a concept called artistic flow, which applies to most creative endeavours, where the artist, the writer, the designer, the musician, they kind of get themselves into a zone where everything seems to flow through them, and it's more of a subconscious rather than a conscious process, which I think applies to what you're talking about. Definitely. There.
And again, if I'm in a bit of if I'm about to start a new collection, or I'm not quite sure where I'm going, I'll often have big pieces of paper either on the flat or up on my easel on the board, and again be quite playful and make a real mess. And then again, this is something we did in constructed textiles. We used to get a little viewfinder and find different bits and cut them up and then work into them. So I'll end up with lots of smaller pieces that will then often be the basis for a bigger piece. And again, I'll use them as a trigger, as a starting point, because they have got the palette and the proportions and the ideas from a particular place, and they will be there, start me off, and then they'll go away, and then I'll let the big painting take me on the journey that's either quite true to that original piece, or that takes me on another little wander off somewhere else. So.
Thank you. What other questions you guys got?
Do you feel that your art has matured with you?
Completely. Oh gosh, yeah. Very much so. Yeah, I would say, because I've only been back in the studio about 15 years, and even in that short period of time, even particularly in the last 5 years, and even in the last year, it has changed, I think, quite a lot. Interestingly, I was, partly for this, I was looking back on some earlier work from sort of 2018, 2019, where I was using, I'm using a lot of colour. It's just at the moment I'm going through my blue period. There was a lot brighter colours, and it was a lot more graphic and perhaps a little bit more textured. But I was also working as a graphic designer back then, and I think having this order with one kind of work was definitely influencing the sort of the grid and the very sort of structured way I was painting as well. And I still work like that a wee bit, but I enjoy sometimes having more flowing paintings and aspiring to Rothko, always going back to Rothko, this, aspiring to be as minimal as I can. And that's actually something that I keep trying to work on. I would like to be a bit more minimal. I'd like to be a bit more abstract, but it's actually a very difficult thing to achieve. And I say that each painting that I make is almost practice for the next one. And it's a continual learning for me.
It's interesting to hear you talking about, you've got obviously the art side of things and the tapestry and the skills, but the interlinks with you as a girl, as a woman, as a young campaigner and activist, how you get a message through as you talk about the darkness and there's light and hope. There's like paralleling.
Yeah, I think this is the thing. Every aspect of my life, I think, has all come to this point now that the teenage me that was so determined, and this whole thing of there's no wrong path of what you do. And I have taken every life experience, and it's all definitely without a doubt. And I stay in some ways that if I hadn't perhaps had family, if it hadn't been for the girls, I don't know whether I would be back in the studio painting, because after my 15 years as a project manager and I'd started giving my art materials away. It was crazy. I had a friend who was a primary school teacher, an art teacher in primary schools, and they were always low on resources. I was just giving stuff away, which was crazy. And then I took a couple of years out when my girls I'd been working on a big project as a project manager, and it was just suddenly stopped. So from having work to no work, and 3 preschool-age children, I mean, God knows what I was thinking. I was like, now what? What do I do? And I actually took a couple of years out and childminded, because when I was in the process of looking for work, I couldn't find a job that would actually pay me a salary and cover the childcare costs. So I thought, well, if you can't beat them, join them. And I childminded for a couple of years. And it was the best decision I ever made, because I was basically, I was like flipping Mary Poppins. I had these hordes of children and having the best time. I used to take them to the nature reserve. We used to make little sketchbooks and go off with our magnifying glasses. And I used to take them for picnics, and we used to explore outside. I had a very sort of Montessori approach to my child. I had a big garden that I used to just have things, and we used to explore, and it was very much led by them and nature and making. And I took over one of our rooms in our house where it was all very hands-on craft making, and it was just very very lovely, and we did a lot of stuff with food as well, so all my love nature, food and making. And I did that with young people, and it was just magic, and it was just brilliant. And from the back of that, I started doing workshops for kids, and it just happened. One of the ways that I childminded, his mom is a weaver. She's a willow weaver. She's amazing, and she found out eventually that I was a weaver. And she said, "Have you never thought about making again?" And I was like, "Well, I kind of thought that bit of my life was in the past." And she invited me to her open studio, and I literally dug about in boxes in the cupboards to find some tapestries that I still had. I made some little cards, and this was back in 2015. And then I had my first little open studios alongside her beautiful willow pieces. And I still credit Rachel to the day that if I hadn't had that moment and that experience, I don't know whether I'd have been back in the studio. But the following year, when I had open studios with her, and she might have slightly regretted this, I was still childminding at the time. I was taking my children through to Dundee to the McManus Galleries and DCA for art workshops. And it suddenly dawned on me, gosh, there's nothing in Forfar, there's nothing for young people to do creatively. And because I'd gone through all the checks with the care inspectorate in terms of child protection and safety, I could do workshops, and I've got this room in the house. And anyway, to see if there was an appetite for it in Forfar, I used Rachel's open studio to run taster workshops for young people and their families in Forfar. And over the weekend of 3 days, we had over 55 young people come in for these taster workshops. And it was like, okay, this is something's happening here. So off the back of that, I immediately launched Explore, Play, Create, which was my workshops for preschool and primary age school children. I was back in the studio, I was childminding, I was still doing a lot of graphic design and project management, and I was just juggling all the balls. And it was just like every bit of my life was just coming to this massive crossroads. And then over time, I've just gradually, COVID managed to sort of put some of it to one side. The workshops kind of stopped for a while, and I've just streamlined, and I'm now at the stage where I'm just painting full time. And it just all seems to have come to this point that I was always aiming to get to. And it's been a great journey. It's not been the most direct, but it's been amazing.
Victoria, I think we've come up to time now, so I think that's a great place to leave it on. Your transcendental, if I could put it that way, transcendental journey, coming to a point, coming perhaps some ways almost in full circle from the start of your artistic career, from your studies through the different parts of the journey that you've been on to get to this point, to the expression, beautiful expressions of where you are right now that we see here. So I just want to say on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank
Are you going to hang around for a few minutes?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so Victoria's still here. If you want to speak to her individually, I'm sure she'll be more than happy to have a wee chat. But
Yeah, no,
thank you all
certainly.
for coming.
Thank you very much.